Hey everybody, it's Abby Steele here. Welcome to this Crowdcast webinar on using alphabetic code charts. First things first, an apology to those of you who wanted to come to watch this live last Wednesday. My youngest child had an allergic reaction to some bubble bath and so was very sore and swollen for quite a few days, so I was out of action. So I rescheduled it for today, for this Monday morning. But a lot of you will now be watching it as a recording because obviously I messed your diaries up. So I'm really sorry about that. Thanks for your patience. It's family life, isn't it? Anyway, let's get on with today's content. And the inspiration for today's webinar came from an email that I received from a teacher who was asking a few questions about the alphabetic code chart. And they understood the concept and find it very useful, but they were finding that colleagues were questioning it and colleagues were suggesting that it might be better to use other forms of visual display chart for phonics. So we're going to tackle a bit of that in today's session, sort of how you can explain to colleagues the benefits of using an alphabetic code chart, because obviously this is my preferred visual support for phonics. So let's get on with the content. Using an alphabetic code chart to support reading and spelling in secondary schools. Our plan, the things we're going to talk about roughly in this order. What is an alphabetic code chart? And when we look at what an alphabetic code chart is, that also helps us to look at some of the benefits and some of the features that are different from other types of chart. Who is it for? How is it used? And how is it different from other charts? Now, full credit must go to Debbie Hepplewhite because alphabetic code charts are her thing. She is the only and first person that I've seen in my career to design this type of visual chart. She spent many, many years, campaigning for the benefits of it and trying to actually persuade other phonics program writers that she's not, copywriting and holding on to the concept. She would really like if other programs adopted this way of displaying the phonics because it's so logical and useful. And there's been some resistance on that, which is a real shame. So alphabetic code charts can be generic, they can go beyond a program, or they can be program specific. And Debbie promotes that work and she makes a lot of her work completely freely accessible. I've put some links in the chat box of the webinar for her alphabetic code chart website where you can get the charts completely for free. You don't need to enter your details, it's not a data capture. And also, because there's quite a lot on there, I pulled out some of my favorites and I've put those in a download section on my website, and there are some links in the chat where you can go and get those as well. So full credit to Debbie Hepplewhite. This is her work that we're talking about and sharing today. So a little bit of terminology that I will use through the session just to refresh your mind. Grapheme. A grapheme is the term that we use when we talk about either one letter, or it can be 2 letters, 3 letters, or even 4 letters working together to represent a piece of code, a sound. So when we talk about the visual, what we can see, the letters on the screen or the letters on the page, that is the grapheme. Grapheme is an easier word to use than saying letter or group of letters. But you might also hear graphemes referred to as spellings or alternative spellings. It's the different ways that a sound can look when you see it. Phoneme means sound, and quite often I like to use the language of sound for phoneme because there's no particular benefit of using the word phoneme over the word sound. Sound is completely adequate. And then I use grapheme for the visual representation. So I actually muddle them a bit. I use grapheme and sound, and that's absolutely fine. And here is a little example at the bottom of the screen here. The sound is A, and you know that I'm talking about the sound A because of those slash marks. The slash marks indicate this is the sound notation. We're talking about A. And here are the different graphemes that represent that sound A, the different ways of spelling A. And as you can see, there are quite a lot of them. Bit more terminology. So the simple code, we can refer to phonics in the simple code and the complex code. The simple code is largely one way of spelling per sound. So when children start learning phonics at about 4 years old, we teach them a load of sounds, like here we've got the SAP in order of sounds. So we teach them s and a and t and I. And to begin with, we really just teach them one way of representing that, one way of spelling those sounds to get them up and running. There are a few exceptions. You might mention something like double letters if it crops up quite early, or another one that we teach quite early is the sound k. We teach the curly k and the kicking k, and often the c and the k together as the k. We teach that quite early, that bit of code. But then we revisit all of the sounds and we come back round to this kind of cyclical pattern. We come back to the earlier sounds and we teach more ways of spelling. And we don't always teach all the more ways of spelling. We teach one or two more ways of spelling, and again, then come back around to that sound in the future and teach more ways of spelling. And the later that we go, the further along these rows that we go with these graphemes, these spellings, the less common they are. So we tend to teach the most common graphemes or the most common spellings first, and the less common a little bit later. Now, as children get older, when children are in secondary school, it tends to matter a bit less because actually they're older, they're dealing with text that is much more mature. It contains lots of different pieces of code, and they've probably been through phonics multiple times actually. Often they're very good already at the simple code. They know the simple code. It's the complex code that's really tripping them up. It's remembering those different ways of spelling or the rarer ways of representing a pronunciation. So we can split the code into simple and complex. Younger children learn simple first, then complex. For older learners, it's a bit more complicated. If you were learning English as a new language, so you've come over, you're in school, your English is an additional language, you would need to go back to the simple code and learn that cumulatively to help you build up the language before you move to the more complex code. So what is an alphabetic code chart? Well, the alphabetic code, this term, is referring to the reversible relationship between the discrete sounds that we can identify in speech in the English language and the letters or letter groups which are code for the sounds. Those are those graphemes. So it's that relationship between sounds and letters or sounds and graphemes. Some people prefer to describe the alphabetic code as letter sound correspondences, and they might call them GPCs, grapheme phoneme correspondences. Or others prefer to say sound letter correspondences, phoneme grapheme correspondences. The big point here is that they are correspondences, they are reversible, they work together, they are two sides of the same coin. That's how the language works. Sometimes we might approach some teaching from a print to sound point of view. So if we are looking at letters or we're looking at words, if we are reading, we're going print to sound, that is grapheme to phoneme, letter to sound. But if we are writing something, we want to spell something, we can't see any words, we can't see any letters or graphemes. We're thinking about what can we hear in that word, and then we want to put it into letters, we want to type it or we want to write it. That is phoneme to grapheme, that is sound to print. So it works in both of those ways. The correspondences are taught and learned reversibly. That is, from print to sound for a reading subskill and from sound to print for a spelling subskill. So you can separate them, you can teach them separately, and sometimes it's very useful to focus on them separately. But especially as children get older, it's actually very useful to know that they work both ways. Reading, see the shapes, you look at the letters and graphemes, you say the sounds. Spelling, you hear or you think of the sounds and you have to remember, you have to recall the shapes, the correct ones, and not the letters or the graphemes. So an alphabetic code chart is a core visual aid. And I think sometimes the usefulness, the power of these is underestimated. It's not just a little extra poster that we can pop on the wall or a little desktop for a bit of support. They are incredibly useful. Core visual aid. They list the units of sound, which is around 42 phonemes, and then some combined phonemes. And a combined phoneme is where technically we are producing two sounds, but we're using it to represent perhaps one grapheme or one letter. So in the case of X, the letter is X. Actually, to make the sound that an X represents, we go x, x. We're making a k, s. We're making two sounds, so we're combining two phonemes. It is combined phoneme, but there's no other way to represent the sound that is x for the X letter. It's just the way that the language works. So 42-ish sounds plus some combined sounds. So on Debbie's alphabetic code charts, there's usually around 50 sounds in total represented. And they go down the left-hand column, and you can see those in yellow, they're the sounds. And across each row are the corresponding spelling alternatives, the graphemes. A nice little example here of the S, and we have the spellings in snake, glass, palace, house, city, scissors, castle, pseudonym. But then the sound A actually only has one way of spelling it. We just have that letter shape A for the sound A. So that's quite interesting. Some sounds have many, many, many ways of spelling. Some sounds just have one way of spelling. So the sounds are listed down the left-hand column because they come to an end point. That's quite an important feature of the design of these. So there are a finite number of sounds in the English language that we use. However, the number of graphemes, the spelling alternatives, goes on and on and on. I think the one with the most is the sound is or, and it has 12 ways of spelling it, or 13 if you include, there's a little spelling alert that's quite useful. So it can be 12 to 13 that you want to show just for that sound or. So if you think that some sounds just have one way of spelling, like the a, and some sounds like or have 12 to 13 ways of spelling, it's how do you represent that visually in a way that is clear and easy for people to use and to reference, and that fits on a page or fits on a poster. So it literally comes down to the logistics of how will it fit on a page? How will it be easy to use? It makes more sense to list those graphemes across the rows. Now, and I know this, I've tried to make many visuals in the past where I've jiggled around with the space and the size, and it just works better that way. A choice can be made as to how many spelling alternatives are listed on the chart as code for the sounds. So each author, each person that has created a phonics chart or table has had to make choices about, well, how many of those spellings am I going to show? Am I going to show all of them because I want it to be incredibly thorough? Am I going to show just a starting few because perhaps this table is for very beginner learners and they don't need something more complicated yet? Are we going to show as many as we can, but maybe not bother with a few of the really rare ones? You know, do we really need to put those on? They've all had to make choices about how many to fit across the rows. I find that Debbie's charts have put in a really comprehensive amount. There aren't many that aren't included on the chart. An alphabetic code chart then is rooted in the sounds. It starts with the sounds and then we're looking at the spellings. The sounds are the starting point, and that's an important feature. Here's just a little snap. You don't need to see this in any detail. We're going to have a closer look in a moment. But this is how I can show to you that this chart is 2 sides of A4 paper, and it fits in really the whole English language. There's not much that's not on it. There are a few really rare ones, but there's not much that's not on there. And that's how you can get it to fit onto 2 sides of A4, which is, you know, no mean feat. That's really tricky. That's really behind the design. So the units of sound are written in slash marks, and that's really important to make it absolutely crystal clear that that indicates the sound. If you don't put the sound notation in slash marks, people have to think, do you mean the sound or do you mean the letters? What do you mean? And we'll exemplify that later when we look at some other another chart. But I find, and other people find, and a lot of publishers use this now, a lot of formal documents use these slash marks to notate this is the sound. Then you'll find that authors, people who've designed the posters, have made different choices about which shape to put in those slash marks to indicate the sound that is notated. So in this example, we've got the kicking k shape inside the slash marks because you are more automatically going to make a k sound when you look at that. If we had a curly k, like cat, inside the sound slash mark notations, you might say, is it k or is it going to be s, like cinema? It makes you hesitate just for a split second, whereas the k is just k, so we're going to say k. So it creates that sort of automatic response. It makes it easier for people who aren't experts in phonics. So here we've got the sound is k, and the spellings are the C, the K, and the CK together. And our example words there, cat, key, and duck. And we've got a little grey dash just before the CK because that's indicating you don't get that spelling, the CK, as a k sound at the beginning of words. There will always be something before that in an English word. We don't have that at the beginning. So it's just a little helpful clue to do with positions and spelling rules. So this is just what I said. The letter K is chosen to represent the sound in the slash marks because this letter shape is consistently code for the k sound in printed words. The letter shape C is inconsistent because sometimes it's code for the S sound as in city and sometimes it's code for the K sound as in cat. So in an alphabetic code chart, we're trying to be as clear as possible, as consistent as possible, as user-friendly as possible. No room for error. You don't need to be an expert. This tool will help you. The units of sound on an alphabetic code chart can be listed from top to bottom in any order, so that the order here doesn't really matter. For example, it can be the order that they are introduced in a specific program. So in many, many phonics programs, they use what's called this SAP in order, SAT, IP. It's kind of tradition, it's, you know, what people have used for a long time across many programs. So that's the order that is used in many of the charts that I use. I quite like that order. If, for example, you were using a program like Read Write Inc that has a slightly different introduction of order of sounds, and you were using a code chart, you might want it ordered in the order that Read Write Inc goes in, and that's great, and that's absolutely fine. So it can be for a specific program, or for a generic chart, it can start with sounds which have correspondences of only one letter. So you might still start with a simpler part of the code, rather than sounds like ch, which have corresponding graphemes of more than one letter. So for the ch sound, you would have a C and an H. So it might be simpler to do SAT, for example. It also doesn't matter if you're working with older children, if you wanted to group the consonants and the vowels. You can see here on this extract, the consonant sounds are in blue and the vowel sounds are in red. But I believe that Debbie has some charts that she produced which actually group all the consonant sounds together and all the vowel sounds together. And that's absolutely fine if you want to do it like that. That's no problem. So an alphabetic code chart can be designed to be totally generic or specific to a particular phonics program. It can include the mnemonic system of the program, for example, pictures to prompt the learning of the sounds. So many people are familiar with the absolute classic Jolly Phonics. The Jolly Phonics mnemonic system, you know, how do we get little children to remember these letters and sounds, are little actions and repetitive ditties. So you might have ants on my arm, ants on my arm, and that helps some little children to remember those letters and sounds. Obviously, that wouldn't really be very suitable for much older children. So something that is more universal, more generic, I find more useful for children is to have a picture and a word, and actually useful for adults as well, because it helps us with, well, what's that pronunciation? Oh, it's x, as in fox, x as in books, x as in ducks, x as in cakes. So in this example, we've got a picture and a keyword for each of the graphemes, each of the ways of spelling. So it's a little reminder, a little, you know, helping hand along the way. And that's something that personal preference, you might find your learners don't need. It might be overly complicated. You might not want any pictures or any words. You might want pictures but not words. You might want words but not pictures. That's absolutely fine. But I find having something helps learners become more independent more quickly. The most informative alphabetic code charts show the graphemes, the spelling alternatives discretely, so you can see each of those graphemes in bold, in black along that row. So it's showing it on its own, and also highlight the spelling alternatives in the key exemplar word. So you can see that spelling at work within the word. You can see how the split digraph, the O and the E in the word rope, how it sits and how it has that consonant letter, the P in the middle. So it helps you to explain, it helps you to sort of get your head around those things as a learner and as a teacher. So we're going to have a really quick whip through Debbie's alphabetic phonics code chart. I'm going to say the sound, I'm going to go across and I'm going to give each of the examples, follow along, join in with me if you like, or come back and look at this later. But it's always useful to have a little quick recap. So have a sip of drink. Off we go. This also just makes us have a stop and have a pause and have a look at the content of a code chart. Snake, glass, palace, house, fence, city, bicycle, scissors, castle, pseudonym. Apple. Tent, letter, skipped, debt, pterodactyl. Insect, symbols. Pan, puppet. Net, bonnet, knot, gnome, engine. Cat, kit, duck, chameleon, bouquet, plaque. Egg, head, said. Hat, who. Rat, arrow, right, rhinoceros. Map, hammer, thumb, columns, welcome. Dig, puddle, rained. Girl, juggle, guitar, ghost, catalogue. Octopus, watch, qualify, salt. Umbrella, sun, touch, thoroughfare. Slight pause just to say, if you have a different accent from me, that is absolutely fine. In my accent, I say umbrella. If you're from a part of the country where you say umbrella, absolutely fine. That's just accent variation. That's correct as well. Ladder, shell. Kettle, pencil, hospital, camel. Feathers, cliff, photograph, laugh. Bat, rabbit, buildings. Jug, cabbage, gerbil, giraffe, gymnast, fridge. Yawn. Aid, tray, table, Sunday, cakes, pray, 8, break, straight. Web, wheel, penguin. Oak, bow, piano, oboe, rope, dough, plateau. Tie, night, behind, fly, bike, Ida. Eel, eat, emu, sunny, concrete, key, chief, monkey, movie, sardines. There are some stars next to sunny, monkey, and movie because you might have an accent where you produce a little bit more of an I sound rather than an E sound. Sunny, monkey, movie. I'm terrible at accents, I apologize. But again, it's just an acknowledgement of regional accent, and it might be slightly different, and that's absolutely fine. Fork, dawn, sauce, chalk, oars, door, snore, for, wardrobe, quarter, court, thought, and water. Again, another note there about accent variation. For me, all of those are a very pure or. Some of you might find half of those a slightly wider or sound. I actually can't produce that sound. That's not in my dialect to be able to produce it, but I can hear it when I go around the country. Zebra, jazz, fries, cheese, breeze. Gong, jungle. Ink, uncle. Violin, dove. Book, should, push, wolf. Moon, blue, flute, crew, fruit, soup, move, through. Fox, books, cakes, ducks. Exam, pegs. Chairs, patch. Picture. Sheep, chef, station, magician, admission. Thistle, there. Queen, awkward. Ow, ouch, owl, plough. Ointment, toy. Statue, unicorn, tube, new, pneumatic. Mermaid, birthday, nurse, earth, world. Mixer, humour, theatre, collar, sailor. Artist, father, palm, half, and calves. Hair, bear, wear. Ear, dear, ears, adhere, cashier. Television, treasure, azure, courgette, and collage. And there's various little helpful notes around the edges there that Debbie adds in to support people. So that is an example of one of these alphabetic code charts, which I find particularly useful. So what is it used for? Who uses it? And some of these you might not have thought of yet, so you might get some good ideas about how you can use it further. Teacher training. It is so useful when you're trying to support colleagues with what phonics is, how to say the sounds. Also, easy reference for teachers. If you're asking teachers who are not phonics experts to support learners with phonics, that's a huge leap. It takes a long time to feel comfortable with phonics. A lot of us have left that behind when we were 4 and 5, so we're not used to that anymore. So actually, for a teacher to have a copy of a code chart to hand, it supports their knowledge. They don't have to learn all of the phonics off by heart. They can just reference it on the chart. So I would give them to teachers to have in their files for planning, or they might have them to track progress. It might be tracking teaching, ticking off which lessons that they've been teaching. It might be tracking progress on how learners are achieving, which sounds they know, which sounds they don't know. I would have giant charts in my classroom on my wall display. Obviously, you have to think about what space you've got and the height that you're going to display those and the accessibility. But it can be really useful for learners to be able to come over and have a look, or quick reference by looking up at the wall. I would have mini charts for learners' own phonics folders. If you use my Abigail Steele Key Stage 3 Phonics, there are copies of the charts in the back of their work booklets. I would send copies home to support parents with understanding what we're teaching and what learners are learning and what can support them with their reading and spelling. I would have mini charts in my literacy policy or my school's brochure. I've even seen some schools put them in, students have like a handbook or a little diary, like a planner, getting them in those, so they're just to hand for everybody. Charts for learners to track their own progress. So again, if you use my phonics program, you'll find those in the workbooks. Children can tick them off. But if not, then you can have charts separately or in a folder for learners to actually self-assess how are they feeling with how they're doing. And they support adults and learners when reading and spelling. So they're useful for both, but mostly for spelling. Mostly I find them useful for spelling, but they're also, because it's reversible, they're quite useful to point out things for reading as well. So here's a couple of examples of them in use. Example A. Imagine the learner has written, it was an emotional chapter, but they've spelled the word emotional, as you can see on the screen, with an SH for the sh sound. And that makes sense, that's what they can hear, but they haven't realised that they need the TI spelling. So the teacher could say something like, I really like your word choice. I agree, it was emotional, wasn't it? Let me help you with the spelling of the word emotional. You've got the right sound, sh, but you need the TI spelling, like in station, see here. And you can show it on the chart. Here is the sh sound. So you're validating them. You did have the right sound, but look, it's tricky. There are 5 different ways of spelling this sound, actually. So, it's no surprise that you picked the wrong one in this instant, but look, I can show you. And it also supports the learner in not thinking, oh God, I spelled it wrong. There are so many ways to spell this. How will I ever learn them? It's finite. They can see it. They conceptualize, oh, those are the different ways of spelling. So that's a absolutely classic example of not just telling them they spelled something wrong and showing the right spelling, but actually explaining and showing where the right spelling comes from. And then a little example for reading. Teacher and learners might be choral reading. So imagine they're choral reading, and in their piece of text it says the feudal system. The teacher could pause and say, let's take a pause, let me help you with the pronunciation of this word, this new word that we might not know or we're just learning about. It's feudal. The letters E and U are code for the U sound. It's the same code in pneumatic and pneumonia. And here we can see it on the chart. And it doesn't matter if the teacher's not an expert. When I break down words that are secondary school words, more complicated words, I don't know all those words off by heart. I have to really go through them and work it out in front of people. So I'm looking at feudal, and I kind of know it's feudal. I'm thinking, well, which sound am I allocating to which letters? Oh, it's the E and the U. Oh, that's on the chart. Yeah, I'm validated by that. And sometimes I get that wrong. You may have heard my example about the word quotient. I was doing a massive training and the word quotient was there, and I don't use that word. So I had it as an example on the screen, and I was reading it as quotient, and I was using my knowledge of root words. I was using quote and quota to get quotient, until somebody, a mathematician, points out to me, no, that's quotient. That word is pronounced quotient. And actually, that makes absolute sense because it has the TI like station representing the sh sound, quotient. I learned that in front of 200 people on an inset training. So you don't have to be an expert. You can just explore the words with the learners, in front of the learners, and that's quite good for them to see that we're not all knowing about everything all of the time. So again, referencing the chart, it's interesting, it gets learners thinking about the details and being interested, but it reassures them that the complexities of English are quantifiable. They're not limitless, they don't go on forever and ever and ever. Sometimes there's rare ones, but you know, we can conceptualize it, we can get our heads around how it all works. So what are the differences between an alphabetic code chart and other charts? And I'm not here to, in any way, shape or form, put down other charts. And I meet many people who prefer other types of charts. So here is a complex speed sounds chart, which I believe is a read write ink tool. And some people absolutely much prefer this. I've met people who say, no, sorry, code chart's not for me. I like this one. So we're just exploring the differences. But of course, I have a bias towards code charts because those are the ones that I like. Now you can see here that in this complex speed sounds chart, the sounds have been organized into consonants and vowels. That's absolutely fine. That's less useful if you're an absolute beginner learner. So we would assume that they've got a beginning knowledge. So we're not going in that cumulative order like SAPing where it builds up and we work down the chart. This is much more sort of, we've got some of that knowledge. We can now reference it in consonants and vowels. And you can see how it's working the opposite way. The layout is the opposite. We've got the sounds going across the page, and we've got the different spellings, the different graphemes for each sound running down each little column. And that's author choice. And then what they fit into those columns is also author choice. So the biggest difference for me is the scope. It's the quantity of sounds and spellings that the learners are exposed to. On an alphabetic code chart, we have 50 sounds. We have 42 to 44 of the English sounds that we have in our language. And then we have a little handful of those combined sounds like x and qu is another one. That's just the way language works. So we have 50 going down. So we always know we're going to have 50 rows. Then I counted up and did a little check because I knew it was about 180, but actually 200 graphemes, 200 ways of spelling those 50 sounds. That's really comprehensive. On a complex speed sounds chart, on this particular chart that we're looking at, there are 44 sounds represented and there are 103 graphemes. That's almost half the content. There is double the amount of content on a code chart than there is on this particular chart we're looking at. Now, some people might say that less code is more supportive, actually, because do children need all of those 200 graphemes? There are some really rare ones on there that they're not likely to use. So do they need all that? That's too much. It's too much to look at. It's too much to sort through. My argument would be that by not having that, it's restricting. We're putting a glass ceiling on the learner's possibilities because we're not exposing them. We're not giving them the chance to go further. We're saying we'll give you this handful of spellings, but don't worry about any more that are more complex than that. You know, we'll tackle that another time. But for me, that makes it more complicated and less consistent because on alphabetic code chart, it's just there it is. It's all there, folks. There's no additional charts. You don't need to go elsewhere for any other information. So you can have your own opinion. Is less code more supportive? It, you know, reduces the cognitive overload and it's, you know, less to sift through and it's easy. If they're struggling to remember anyway, perhaps it's easier for them to remember. Or is it restricting? Is it putting a glass ceiling on the possibilities of them going further? Sometimes I wonder that this is what happens when children are younger. They're taught the simple code and they're not really exposed to the complex code because they're tiny. We're not going to bombard them with all that. But then it kind of blows their mind when they suddenly realise at 6 and 7, oh no, there's loads more ways of spelling that. I know you've always spelled it in that way, or there are those 2 ways, but there's like 8 more ways of spelling that you now need to learn. So conceptually, I actually, from children with about 4 years old, I'm quite open with them about, yeah, we're focusing on the simple code, but look, the complex code exists. And when you are older, you will learn more about that. So I like to expose people to more. And then, was it conscious? Did the designer of the poster design it purposefully with less? It's cleverly designed. That's the exact amount they want the learners to know at this point in the program. That's entirely possible. Or did the designers run out of space? Well, we can't actually fit 6 in one of these columns, so you can't have 6 spellings. You have to cap it at 5. 5 only, no more spellings than that. You don't know. I've worked with many publishing projects before where actually the space on the page, the design, is a huge thing. No, you can't have that many words, not enough space. You need to make it fit a smaller space. So that might come into it as well. And sometimes people might not want to go to a second side. They might not want a second piece of paper. They want this to fit on one side. And this is the most comprehensive way of fitting as much as they possibly can on that space. And then you might maybe move to another poster afterwards. Interesting to think about. Then for me, the technical accuracy. And again, some people might find this really nitpicky, but the way that I work, the way that I think, how do you tell the difference between the sounds and the spellings? So this is called a sounds chart, complex speed sounds. Here are the consonant sounds, here are the vowel sounds. But technically, this is a grapheme chart. These are all graphemes. There's no sounds on here. These are graphemes. I'm looking at letter shapes and I'm producing sounds. There's no clue as to what sound that is other than my previous knowledge of, and sometimes I have to look through more of the chart to work it out. Now, does it matter? So I've put here, you know what I mean. Sometimes people talk very loosely about letters and sounds. And when you talk about letters and sounds, there's an assumption that the people you're talking to know that you mean graphemes and they know that you mean phonemes. And often it's not a problem. When you work on a deeper level, when you get more technical, when you have to produce books and webinars and program content, you have to be more specific. You can't leave room for error. And I've seen it time and time again where experts have confused letters and graphemes and got themselves into a right pickle, actually, because phonics can get quite complicated. So to me, it does matter. To me, I would want some kind of support on this chart to give me a reminder of, well, what is that sound? Or have I got to work it out? So it's easy enough with the it's easy enough to work out those. But when I got to the vowel sounds and I looked at the a, e, I, o, my automatic response was to go, oh, A, E, I, O, U, A, E, I, O. Oh, where's A and E and I? Oh, no, that must be the short vowel sounds. That must be A and E and I and O and and then it's E, A, E, I. Is it A, E, I, O, U, U? Like, it gets muddling. You have to think about it. And then actually, where is the sound A with the letter shape of just the A? Well, it's not on that chart. Well, why is it not on that chart? Is it not common enough? Is the word father? No, not a father. That would be an R. That's not on there either, because under R we've only got AR and that's it. So famous would be an A with just an A. There'll be loads. I'm terrible at thinking of examples off the top of my head. There'll be more common ones. Again, it's author's choice, but for me, as a teacher and as a learner and being supported, I would just prefer a little bit more. So a question for you to think about then, is the lack of distinction between sounds with slash marks and spellings confusing or simpler? It's enabled them to fit more on the page, it's kept it plainer, it's kept it cleaner looking. But is the chart supportive enough without those sound notations? And is it okay to not be very accurate about, well, these aren't sounds, these are actually graphemes that we're looking at. This is a grapheme chart. Does it matter? Does it not matter? A lot of people say it doesn't matter. Down to you to think about. Then a little bit more of the details, hints and support. And really this might come down more to personal preference, because the biggies are the quantity on the chart and the the sound notation for me. This is now getting a little bit into the weeds. So how about the I's in the double O grapheme? How do we feel about having a pair of I's and slanty O's? Is that going to support us when we're reading? Do you know which of one of those is the short and the long oo? How do you know? Do you have to go through it? Do you know your phonics well enough to know that the first one must be long oo because you've got the other spellings underneath? Ooh, 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 ooh. So the other one must be with the I's. Have you learned that program and there's a mnemonic behind, remembering that the is the one with the I's? What about the split digraph, the U and the E, got a little dash in the middle where a consonant should be, and then it's got the loop above. And sometimes these are things in a program that help beginner learners. So for example, it's saying they work together or they're holding hands or they're chatty friends. These two letters are going together. But do we need to have that loop above? How helpful is that loop? I personally wouldn't use that loop because I like to keep things as natural as possible. And for me, this is like, it sounds nitpicky, but I spend a lot of time working in this and thinking about this, as does people like Debbie. It's getting that balance between things that are supportive, helpful, give a clue. So for example, that little grey dash at the beginning of the CK, but actually keeping it as natural as possible, what it would look like if you came across this in a word without extra sort of bits and bobs. Down to you to think about there. So then the mnemonics. An alphabetic code chart gives either picture mnemonics or word mnemonics or both. It doesn't have to have mnemonics. You can have ones without. Are these helpful? Are these too much? Is a planar chart easier to use? And in some instances, yes, a planar chart might be better, more suitable for mature students. They might be ready for a planar chart. I would still use an alphabetic code chart layout because you can get plain charts that I've linked you some and I've given you some for download. But certainly if learners are having intervention and having support, it's likely that they still need a little bit of a mnemonic to give them that support, to give them that bit of a cue. And actually, often this is what's helpful for the adults. It's not always about the learners. Remember, the teachers that are going to be using this, for them to have those words and those pictures, that's really super helpful. So I've mentioned where to get alphabetic code charts. Oh, and I forgot to say as well, if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat and I'll answer those now, or I'll come back and answer those later. About anything to do with alphabetic code charts or sounds or pronunciation, whatever. Or you can email me. I think my email's in there as well. hello@abigailsteeletraining.com. So there's the link here, Debbie's website for code charts. In the chat box, I've put links with direct downloads so you can get those. And here's just a little quick visual of the ones that I've included for you. So this is a really nice chart for teachers because it's on one side of A4. So it's really, really nice and condensed. And it also contains the international phonemic or phonetic alphabet, the IPA symbols. Now, the IPA symbols are not something that we tend to use in this country. It's used more internationally, but if you were going to teach internationally or you have taught internationally, then you might be familiar with these. They might be useful for you, so they're just on there as well. And that's a really nice condensed version, quite mature looking as well for sort of teachers folders. Then we've got a version here which has got an information column down on the right-hand column, that sort of green headed box, and that's really useful, just some extra bits of information. So if you were doing teacher training, this might be a nice one to kind of have on display or to use to support you with some teacher training. This is the same chart. So this one's got pictures and this one has no pictures. So if you wanted to present something a little bit more mature or you didn't want the pictures, that's the same. No pictures, but it does have the extra information down the side. This is the example that we were looking at in the slides. This is a giant poster. So this is one that you can blow up and put on a wall display. And I think I'm right in saying it comes to 10 pieces of paper. So 10 pieces of A4, which you could either do as a great big long column if you have nice tall students, or you could split it in half and lay it side by side. You have to look at your space, but that's a nice one to get blown up as big as you can. That one's got pictures and this one has no pictures. So again, if you felt like for your learners, you didn't want the pictures anymore, there is a version here. Still has the keyword, still has where that spelling sits in a word and the graphemes. A little side note here, you've got sense, city and bicycle, the E, the I and the Y in that sort of bubble lettering, because technically they're not part of the grapheme, but they are a spelling alert. If you see the letter C and it's followed by an E, an I or a Y, it is likely to be a soft sound rather than a k sound. So it's a clue for you. And children may learn about that in spelling. This is a really nice one as well. I like aesthetically the way this looks. This is 2 sides of A4. So this is the first half of it. But this is quite a nice one if you were putting them inside children's planners. Or it could be for adults one. Here you've got the picture mnemonics for the sounds, but not for the spellings. You've just got the words for the spelling. So again, just a different way. This is the one that I use all the time in training because it's 2 sides of A4. So not too bad on paper consumption as a handout, and desktop charts. People tend to use these as desktop charts as well for learners in classrooms. And then a version here for self-assessment. So this one's been designed that learners can colour in or can fill in the letters, the graphemes, as they've learned or as they feel confident with them. So it's a bit of a tracking chart, visual tracking chart for them there. And then the final thing to mention to you is this editable Word document code chart. So a colleague of mine, Sarah Lomax, who does some training, she had a fantastic idea. She had been working with a school and talking about how actually you can personalize these charts. You can tweak them and mess with them and do what you want with them. So you might, for example, if you were the science teacher, or you might want to work with the science department, you could get science words that contain all of those spelling examples and populate the chart with your own chosen word examples. The thing that I'm not sure about how that would work is if the words were very long, you'd have to fiddle around with it because the formatting is really, really difficult. To get these charts to fit onto 2 sides of A4 is an awfully fiddly job. It took me a very long time. So play around with it. You might need to make things smaller before you can size things up, or you might need to literally just think about the lengths of the words and whether that's going to skew or whether it's going to fit. But I think that's a fantastic idea that if you're interested, you want to have a go at, you can personalize these by choosing your own words, subject-specific words. And that might be a really nice in-house teacher training activity, actually, to get different departments to work together on an inset or a training session to try and come up with subject-specific word examples for all the spellings, and then make your own charts. And you could either do it, typing into the Word document and change it to PDF, or you could do something quite fun, making it into a bigger wall poster for students to use in class. So that as well is in the chat as a download. And if you can't find it or you miss it or there's a problem, you can always just email in. And that's it. I hope you found that really useful, thinking about alphabetic code charts, why I like them, the benefits of them, how they're different to other charts. No right and wrong, just my preference. I find them logistically better and useful. Oh, excuse me. If you have any questions, you can put a question in the chat now. And if you think of a question later, you can pop it in the chat again. And I do come back and check the chats for questions of the webinars, or you can email in, like I said, my email's on the screen. If you're not part of the Facebook group, there's a Key Stage 3 Phonics Club Facebook group. And I suppose just to mention as well, check back on my webinar page because I'm trying to do a combination of webinars that are paid so I can put food on my table, but also some webinars that are free to give value to everybody who works with me and who I support. So there are some free webinars in there as well. There's one coming up on reading fluency. We're going to explore and talk about reading fluency at the end of March. And that will also be in there as a recording for free, so you can come back to it anytime that you like. And if you think of any topics that you would like me to talk about, then email in or pop some accessible free webinars on important topics for you. Again, for your time. I can't see any questions coming up in the chat, so I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will catch you next time. Thanks everyone, bye for now.